Good evening, everyone. I'm Allison Myers, and it's a pleasure and privilege to host Denise Abercrombie and Jonathan Andersen, two poets I greatly admire and for whom I have deep personal affection. For our guests who are new to Writers and Books, you're encouraged to go to www.wab.org to explore our many virtual events, readings, book launches, and writing workshops for readers and writers of all ages, including summer write camps for children K through 12. So this evening, I won't use precious time to cite Denise and John's many achievements, as their bios appear on our website. Suffice it to say that John has several collections of poetry to his credit, most recently Augur, and I encourage you to read all his books. Denise is an accomplished performer, theater director, and writer for the stage. Her poems have been published widely. My friendship with you, Denise, goes back 30 years. I was calculating tonight, and it's kind of scary. And with you, John, around 20.
Yeah.
Yet when I read your poems, I always see and feel something I hadn't noticed before. A word, a line, an idea, music. Poems with this kind of frisson, the quality to wake me up and teach me, are rare and important. So tonight, to start, I'd love for you each to read several poems. Then we'll pause for conversation, and then resume with your reading a few more poems apiece, and conclude with more conversation and Q&A with our online guests. Thank you to our guests for joining us by Zoom. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and I'll do my very best to include them. So Denise, may we start with you?
Sure. Hi. Welcome, everyone. You're invisible to me, but I feel your loving presence. We're very grateful to Allison for including us in this virtual literary series. Thank you, Writers and Books, and its amazing staff, especially you, Dan Hurd, for featuring us in our very first Zoom reading. So this is this is a first. We're really this is all new to us, so we're really excited to do this together. Okay. Moving forward, the saying catches on, creeps from the speech of the politician, newscaster, boss, down to the toddler who tests it out when negotiating a snack. Moving forward, I want gummy bears. Gone are the days of in the future or from now on. Forget entirely henceforth. Never mind the past or any of its linguistic ghosts, our public space, our pensions. We're moving forward, leaving on a bullet train, no, a Tesla, to our desired destination. Make no mistake, we're being told in a newfangled way what to do. Yet, moving forward suggests action-packed adventure, a future unlike our history, filled with promise, an invitation to Neanderthals to embrace human progress. Note the physicality, the ongoing participial momentum of the ing ringing its hideous bell, as if leading us toward enlightenment, nirvana, instead of a fascist state unlike any our stunted imaginations could ever fathom. Moving forward, what follows must be in our own best interest. Moving backward, I'd like to read a few poems set in the 1970s. Daughters of Renters. Joy is a lady of the evening, and I cast myself as a die. The daughters of single moms who rent, we strut and tumble along in high heels and sneakers, follow other spirits on All Hallows Eve along Litchfield's puritanical town green, down boulevards filled with white mansions and great lawns, guarded by hedges or wrought iron fences. Homeowners chuckle at our trick-or-treat as we teeter on the edge between middle school and high. Joy with her real-life oversized breasts, fishnet stockings, cherry lipstick, me, her flat-chested sidekick, hidden inside a white box with black dots and the painted face of a mime. We who never knew the girls who disappeared, one trapped and burned alive in her bedroom, the other raped and dumped in the woods. Together, scrounge for sweets and wonder whether or not our strange bodies will bring us better luck. Watertown Drive-In, circa 1974. Nights on Route 8, Mom made us turn away from the flickering nudes in the valley. Once, my gang snuck there to see Brando and to breathe the river's stench of Naugahyde. We looked up to this godfather of the big screen, his easy way of saying, make him an offer he can't refuse. In the dark, nestled on an empty patch, we too became the kind of family anyone would kill for. It's surreal these days to see drive-in theaters making a comeback and so many other businesses closing. This next poem was inspired by this past semester when our high school closed its doors, along with every other school, on March 13th. Distance learning. One hawk, then another, swoop into the meadow and perch on fence posts. We walk a new path on Horsebarn Hill as a couple passes with their teenage daughter. A parent who once called the principal to complain about my politics greets us and jokes, let's keep our distance. I suppose we share a deep love of this place since we meet so many nights on the slope. A father and his sons fly kites, a rainbow and a stained-glassed bat tangle in midair. Back home, a friend invites us to a virtual party for her camera-shy husband. So many faces fill the screen, his birthday song staccato. Still, she displays, then cuts his homemade cake covered with 50-some-odd candles. Our older son studies slave manifests from the colonial era and calls to say he's growing cabbages in his Madison apartment. Soon he'll forage for fiddleheads and morels. An estranged buddy calls about his daughter's fourth grade teacher just to hear the sound of my husband's voice. A colleague who ignores me at work texts me at home. Just wanted to touch base and see how you're doing. For years, we've been cliquey and buried beneath stacks of uncorrected papers. One morning, 3 kits come out from hiding under the barn floor to wrestle in the grass. As we struggle to take good pictures through our dirty kitchen window, our younger, recently evacuated from college, observes how they blend in with the fallen leaves. At night, he builds a fire in the front yard pit and invites us in. We step away from our online lives, witness the blaze, sit as close as we possibly can to him. A few years ago on my birthday, I asked my husband, John, to take me down the road to the Ashford Oak. For over 350 years, this tree was the largest known red oak in Connecticut and once the largest in the nation. We'd often past the Ashford Oak sign on Route 44, but had never taken the time to visit. Ashford Oak, July 11th, 2018. Praise the spider at the center of her web, standing vigil in your shadow. Praise your lightning scars and splits, see-through twists, the rotting pulp of your boughs. Praise to the impossible lift, tonnage of your hollowed out heartwood. To leaves that sprout and cling in spite of gypsy moths, honey fungus, and winds, praise. Praise to stewards who protected and pruned, arborists with their cables, sprays, and feed. Loggers and farmers who found you too gnarled or sprawling to fell. Praise bare branches, dark-ridged bark overgrown with trumpet vine, and praise your fallen crown. Let poison ivy and briars overtake your many rings. Let raspberries ripen near your sunlit roots. Praise to surrendering this sanctuary to brambles. Praise this final bit of shade.
Thank you, Denise. Very beautiful.
Thank you.
I love hearing you read poems I'm familiar with, and of course, the new ones as well. John, you're on.
Okay. Thank you, Allison, for inviting us, for organizing this. And Dan, thank you for helping me make this possible. Denise and I do a lot of walking together. We've done a lot of walking together. It's one of our great pleasures. And so I'm going to begin with a poem walking through some of the landscape that Denise described so beautifully in her poems and in the photos. To locate this one maybe a little bit more specifically, a few years ago, walking the land around Horse Barn Hill, which is part of the agricultural land owned by the University of Connecticut, we were committing John Keats's To Autumn to memory, so we were saying lines to each other. And also during this time, we were thinking a lot about police killings of innocent people. I think Philando Castile and Freddie Gray, their deaths were pretty fresh at that time. This poem is called The Bellatress. Bellatress are writers of belles lettres, fine writings. The Bellatress, Storrs, Connecticut. We walked down into this valley, and I swear straight into Keats's To Autumn, where full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. I listened to the words tumble like apples from your lips, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core. Your full lips again, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells, and the rosy-hued land darkens from the west. The poet, like us, walked to feel his blood, to pass through his breath hanging in the air. But you remind me that mellow fruitfulness, twined flowers, and last oozings, all the ripening towards death, burst forth loaded with his grief for the slaughter in St. Peter's Field. Women and men, hands up high, run through with bayonets, trampled, crushed a month before the harvest moon rose, the one that rises now, swollen, bright, as implicated as gathering swallows while workers fall. Criminentlies, the word as closely as to proper spelling as I can get it, Crymunintles, Criminentles. 2 mornings after declaring, glass of wine raised in firelight, that I would not write any more poems about my father, I slide open the barn door, squat down to replace the 3-decade-worn tines of the Troy-built M8, the 8 for 8 horsepower he bought with I still don't know what money. I tilt the tiller forward. It looks bowed in prayer. Each tine, hardened steel hooked right or left like the business end of a scythe, comes off with the loosening of 2 bolts, falls and clatters ringing briefly on the ground. I think I'll remember, but quickly lose the tricky offset pattern, 16 blades and 4 opposing gangs of 4 turning away from each other and towards each other by turns. By the time I have them all replaced, lock nuts cranked down hard, anticipating years, the stall is filled with sun and the new tines gleam. I groan to stand and exclaim unthinkingly, Criminentles, startling myself with a word my father used to say, its exact meaning I never thought to ask. It turns out that the word is a kind of minced oath, like Jiminy Crickets, which my father also said. And I'll read one more poem before pausing. This is a still life. At the edge of the meadow, I duck under the great low sweeping hemlock boughs, enter night, hiding at noon where a bloom of white resolves into you, the skull of a white-tailed buck. I pick you up, a little shocked at the parts we share, eye sockets, nasal cavity, incisors. You bear the skeleton of a veiny leaf, a coat of arms tattooed on top of your head. And I see now that you are not just one whole, but stitched together with fine, intricate lines like cave drawings, once meaningful. I want to ask you how you lived, how you persisted as far as you could. Here, I want to tell you there are whole days I can barely stand up, never mind run or turn to leap, and I would gladly trade my skull, this hard case of clustered storms, for your sleek contour, your fiercely driven nights, your one broken antler with which I would thrash and knock through the seasons that remain.
Wow. Oh my gosh, so wonderful to hear you read those, John. As I said in my little intro, I'm always surprised, which is wonderful. So I have a number of questions. I know we will get to them all, but your lives are so full. You're very engaged teachers, your parents, your farmers, and your writers. I think our guests would like to know, as I would like to know, how do you balance it all?
Well, we don't. We're always, balance is a theme of conversation and just trying to be very deliberate. I think one thing that comes up a lot is that, on one hand, you take any one of those things from the list and it can be very draining and drains away energy from something else on the list. So, just for example, especially now in the time of pandemic, teaching takes a tremendous amount of energy and creative energy and focus. And then how do you find time to write? But the dialectic there is that the teaching also is sustenance and feeds the writing and the life. So that's part of what we do. I don't know, Dee, do you want to speak to that too?
Yeah, it's a struggle, but it's about performing triage in many ways. What has to get done first gets done. And often that's around children. Both of us work with students, and we have our own children. So, we have to make sure everything's taken care of in the house. And in a lot of ways, for me at least, a lot of the creative pursuits are a little bit on the back burner, but they're always there. And as John pointed to, our lives enrich that. I know it's always there. That's where I make meaning out of a lot of the bureaucracy and meaninglessness that happens in a day where I get overwhelmed. I can turn to reading other people and writing as a way to make meaning. And then I'm full and I can go back and give to my students and explain to my sons why it's all worth it. The meaning comes from the struggle. And yet we're all, I think, struggling to have time to try to realize as much as we can in this lifetime, our humanity, when we know at every turn that we are being, under capitalism in any case, it's very difficult to have a fully human life, and fighting for ourselves and each other is going to be paramount. So there's never enough time.
Beautifully expressed. Yeah, I do. I see what you're saying, and yet both of you managed to produce quite a lot of work. Frankly, I'm always amazed what you're able to bring forth out of your busy lives. And I know that you're very engaged in your everyday lives. So your poems of engagement are really just part of that whole fabric. And yet it takes work to fashion experience into art. And it takes discipline and work and lots of self-examination, I know. So I'm impressed by you.
Well, I just want to add in that what it really takes is community. We've been part of several writers groups throughout the years.
With you, Allison, for a long time, of course.
Amazing sustenance for us and feedback that genuinely has nurtured us. And it's a community effort in many ways. Writing is a social production. And without our groups that we've been in, without those people, I don't think we could have produced anything. I mean, it's just been part of that process.
I love that you're saying that, because so often there's this kind of trope of, the isolated, tortured writer writing in isolation, but in reality, the enriched process of interacting and challenging ourselves and encountering challenges to our received opinions is really how we generate meaningful art. So I'm so glad that you said that. One of the things that so interests me about both your work, and especially yours, John, is your attention to nature and the natural world, and in such minute and sensitive and deep ways. The minute recording, the close observations, and at the same time, certainly, I would say that you're a poet of deep engagement with the political world, the social world, class struggle, obviously racism and class. And it's quite extraordinary to me that you're able to kind of embrace the whole. Like I just wrote down a part of a line that you read, gathering swallows while workers fall. One, the music of that and the visual aspect of that, but that absolutely, I feel, original collision between the gathering swallows while workers fall, and you make those connections for us And so I wonder if you can kind of talk about how your poetry may have evolved out of something that in other days might have been called more of a pastoral lineage, and then into the arena of engaged poetics.
So I think it's a part of, I think what everyone's doing, you know, you're trying to always make your world whole, you know, of one piece, and it's all part of it. Even seemingly the most disparate aspects are part of it. You know, in that poem, actually, I'm sampling pieces of To Autumn, of course, you know, gathering swallows while workers fall. And thanks for noticing that connection. I think, you know, that poem especially, you know, I said we were spending a lot of time walking and in this, you know, beautiful pastoral landscape, and we were also thinking a lot about what was going on, some of the horrific things that were going on, and it's all part of the same world. John Keats, the literary critic, Irish literary critic Tom Paulin, theorizes that Keats wrote To Autumn, this great belles lettres poem, partly fueled by his absolute anger and horror by the Peterloo massacre, where innocent working class people protesting, hands in the air, having to recognize this, were run through with bayonets, were killed, were slaughtered. And so I think that was really interesting that this poem that we think of in terms of pastoral and aesthetics and beauty of language is fueled by this very political event, in which gets at what political means. Political is about not just checking boxes or, you know, a nominal ideology. It's about your lived experience and what's possible. So, you know, just trying to bring everything together, I guess.
I know that there's a great deal of discipline involved in that, and yet when the final product is certainly seems so organic and beautifully, seamlessly produced. Denise, I have a couple of questions for you. What is it like living with in intimacy with a partner who's also a poet? Do you inspire each other, influence each other, provoke one another? Tell us a little bit about what that that relationship is like as both folks who teach and live and then you're writing together. How does that work?
I think, you know, John and I are each other's main support with writing. I think I can speak for him right now. We both, I think we're our toughest critics together. I mean, if he wants me to read something and give him honest feedback, I give it to him. He's used to that, and the same with me. And I feel that we also encourage each other. We come up with, you know, occasionally, you know, one day there was a fairy ring emerged in our lawn. It was just a mysterious ring. And I said, you need to, you know, I left for the day and I said, you need to write a poem about that. And so occasionally life brings you a prompt, and we'll do that for each other, because I sometimes know the material that he can, you know, bring his imagination to. And he has a beautiful poem on this subject. So I felt really part of it, and that, you know, I kind of assigned it. And he, in turn, will often listen to my poetry. And as part of our writers group, we're in the same writers groups we have been historically. Sometimes I'll share my work with John before we go into writers group, and I feel like that's a little bit of cheating, because I kind of want his first impression with the rest of the group. And yet I really feel that he always has my best interest in mind, and that he will always try to help me make my best poem, so that I feel less hesitant going into group, because I tend to be probably a little more self-conscious. So I feel that we're there for each other in the process, and it's really helpful because we both come across different poets and share, and it's just part of our lives. And I mean, it's how we met, really. We both had the same teacher, James Scully, at the University of Connecticut, and that's when we knew we were simpatico. It was through Jim.
Actually, Jim brought you and me together.
That's right. That's right. I mean, everything's kind of a social production.
Yeah, I just want to heartily second what Denise is saying. I mean, you know, we both feel, but I mean, I can't really express, even though supposedly I'm a poet, how fortunate I am. And we're always, you know, people grow, individuals grow. And, you know, we've been together for 22 years, 23 years, married 21 years. And we've both grown, but it's wonderful to grow together and to be part of each other's growth, you know. So, you know, that's just really important. And you know, in terms of the natural imagery, I mean, so much of Denise's poetry has kind of set a bar for me recently, because, you know, you were talking about how we're productive. Denise is more productive than I think, if I could say that. I get really bound up, and I'm trying to always loosen up. And one thing that I've really admired about what you're working on, you know, over this past year, and I don't actually know if I've articulated this to you, is that from the poet's perspective, the subject position, you're open to everything. You know, you're writing about this place where we are. You know, do the best that you can in the place where you are and be kind. It sounds like a Mr. Rogers quote, but that's actually the great radical Scott Nearing, you know. So, you know, your poems are doing that. And I think I need to loosen up a little bit sometimes to try to produce, you know, be open to what's in front of you.
Thanks for letting us peek behind the curtain a little bit. I would love to have you read some more, and I'm sure everyone listening in on this would as well. So Denise, we'll resume with you.
Okay. Occasionally we venture out, and I especially, both of us, enjoy visits to homes of New England writers. So this was inspired from one of our day trips. Walden Pond. The beach surrounds the shrinking eye. Must be the drought. We walk frozen shallows where the wind howls through leafless trees. A hawk circles the shore path to Henry's Cove. The cabin site looks like a grave. As we step into the footprint, we hear traffic stream on Route 126, a jet overhead. Imagine the old growth, pitch pine, hickory, the elms before Dutch elm. What 2 years, 2 months, 2 days felt like at night with the creak and moan of ice, the morning star at the door, the hearth, visitors through the woods, runaway slaves, a handful of lovers, or simply one whose spirit won't, until called by name, rest. This poem is dedicated to our friend Rolando. Thursday's soup. Pozole with its pulled pork, hominy, and floating sprigs of cilantro leads us into history. From Rolando's home in Oaxaca to the 15-year-old with $20 in his pocket on a street corner in New York, to those years he sucked the half-used creamers cleared from tables, to the ancients who believed gods made humans out of maize, to the meat, once human flesh, to the prisoners killed, their hearts ripped out in ritual sacrifice, to the bodies chopped and cooked with corn, to the resulting meal, a holy communion, to hear where we swap numbers with Rolando, who bears the news of those deported. Though the card he hands us reads assistant manager, he confides in perfect English. He can't be separated from his wife and children, whose names he won't reveal. As we cash out, he strains a charming smile. If you don't see me next time, you know what happened. I'll close with two poems set in our local environment. Late Autumn for John. As you make the plot, I divide bulbs, peel back papery skin, and savor the juice beneath my nails. After you turn soil and define delicate rows, we take turns planting clove after clove, agree nothing's sweeter. We cover the bed with straw, wait for another spring, the swirl of scapes reaching. We must return to Codfish Falls, where the pulse quickens at the sudden drop from Fisher's Brook to the gorge. It's good to behold the cascade, to fall in love again. We should stay longer, or promise to follow this stream, reaching for us. At the Gurley Mason Mill, spring and the same old skunk cabbage swirls into existence, opens in the light, feeds on the wet edges of Mason Brook before it spills into the Fenton. Imagine Washington's horse and carriage, the ride up the bumpy turnpike. From the bridge, we spy the punky timbers of a broken dam. Joshua Trust signs nailed into trees remind us this is an attempt at preservation. We almost hear the water wheel, the up and down saw blades rip chestnut boards. A posted map of the long gone mill teaches us the difference between a sluice and a race. Look east to the miller's barn, the cedar tree, the farmhouse that sits on the rise. That's where we live, spoiled by electricity. No one remembers John Chauncey Mason from the 1800s. So here's a tintype, a hungry-looking fellow with a hawk nose and deep-set eyes who sees through our 21st century skin. Old man Mason made it to age 94. One morning, he walked through that meadow to another day of work and was gored by a bull. He must have bled out in the grass or in bed, surrounded by his kin. Yes, I'd prefer to go like that. One gash made by a beast, a view of the sky, and our sons' faces. Chances are, we'll stay for as long as we can and go out not so far from home.
Beautiful, Denise. Thank you.
Thank you.
John, please read again.
Sure. These next three poems form a sort of triptych at the center, the core of Augur, the book that I've been reading mostly from tonight. And they concern my father, who passed away in 2012. And I say, I believe without hyperbole, that he was a casualty of the Vietnam War just 40 some odd years on. You know, those statistics that we read, 58,000 US soldiers, 1 million Vietnamese killed in the Vietnam War, are certainly higher. Wars keep killing after their official ending. Landscaping. My father and I lean exhausted against the side of our truck, watching the day flame out as ducks, or the black flickering silhouettes of ducks erupt from the marsh across the road, no sound but for their whistling wings. And just as their numbers, each an instance of dark flashing, recede down to a few score, 5, none, 1, 3, none again for longer now. And just as I think gone into the trough of the day, a new wave bursts forth into another finale for a half hour. Their rising rises and falls up into the orange air. We watch and listen in awe, but we do not let them inspire us. We do not read them as a sign. Spinning out. And that would have been around the time I'd blow into the town library, trailing rain, leaves, snow, long hair falling down onto my father's old wood smoky army coat, clomping across the floor in black steel-toed boots. I must have looked like, hell, been one of those marginal characters that keep a little adrenaline pumping through the veins of our public librarians. I hunted through the stacks, fingering spines and reading for the first time about the augurs of ancient Rome, peering out from their hoods into starling patterns or kneeling down to sift through scat with grubby hands. They took the auspices. On their words only, the money flowed, the warships plowed ahead. And they were just then sending my friends who had signed up for college money into a short, vicious little war that would go spinning out clockwise and counterclockwise into wars and more wars, endless war my students have now all grown up in, until war is natural as weather. Do you see how no one is surprised by the voice on the radio? Hard to make out, blocky and scuffed like wind across a microphone, reporting a twister sucking up the Connecticut River and walking it eastbound down the Mass Pike. And hardly anyone mentions the many bursts out of nowhere, gusting and howling through these last few years, snapping limbs and power grids, when the tops of the trees clack, hardwoods ache, forests moan. Augury of Innocence. One summer night on the mountain, we sit with my father, who is still handsome, but red-faced and thin-armed with Agent Orange Parkinson's, fatigued from tremor and trauma-racked sleep, and watch high-def coverage of boys shipping out for first and second and third tours of duty, fists bumping on the heat-wavy tarmac as cool ozone blows into the living room through gauzy curtains. Enough, enough, we were just kids, my God, Dad bellows. We all jump, his namesake little Kit in his lap crying out. When I was maybe 4 or 5 or 6 at the most, I squirmed out of my father's arms to watch the maple seeds grow wings and fly, twirling in their descent like helicopters, also like people falling out of helicopters. I began the poem, the reading with a poem about walking, and I want to return to walking here. Walking with you this morning means I have persisted into a 50th year. Muscles and slowly tearing ligaments strap bone. Pain, buried deep as a stone in my core, lifts away. Now we are 2 furnaces melting the ice in the ruts before us on the old turnpike. Gathering momentum up the hill, we will not speak of credit cards, rotten sills, or surgeries. We will not even stop to inspect spider webs. At first we think a trick of winter light, but no, really there, spun like galaxies, icy and hanging from a roadside cairn. With our steps we turn the very planet beneath us, lay down a beat on gravel, stone, pavement, and follow it up to where we meet the wind, where I have to trust my own taut cord running straight to the center of the earth itself, anchored with gravity's cable stretching through gamma rays, through solar flares to the explosions at the core of the sun. I steal a glance. Yes, you're still here, wearing your sturdy boots, reaching for my hand. And every ending, until we get to the end of everything, is a, if not a beginning, at least a link or a transition to something else. So I wanted to end with something hopeful, but that's problematic because, you know, what does it mean to be hopeful right now is maybe a challenging question. You know, I mean, there's accelerating death, the pandemic. I think the first deaths of global climate crisis, you know, are unfolding. The people churned under the building tsunami of the environmental catastrophes. Certainly the racism and class oppression, which, you know, questions are entangled and become more complicated, it seems, every day. So being hopeful we have to be very deliberate about not being naive. You know, it can't just be the thing with feathers. And it also can't be the last thing that dies after, you know, a lifetime of deluding us with false hope. So it has to be something defiant. It doesn't necessarily need to be even optimistic. This is a poem I wrote a long time ago. The title is You Must, and it comes from my first book of poems, Stomp and Sing. You must. You must have a hope that will let you stomp and sing at any cold dawn. You must not wait to love the student who loves you and would like to kill you. You must read the story again and again to the child who receives you with a bovine stare. You must get up every day to punch in, not dreaming on transcendence, not desiring new heroes or gods, not looking the other way, but looking for the other way, and ready to talk to everyone on the line. You must not wait for official approval, nor general consensus to rage. You must come again to kneel in shiny, rock-strewn soil, not to pray, but to plant. Yes, even now as ice caps melt and blacktop goes soft in the sun, you must prepare for the harvest. Thank you.
Oh, I feel very full listening to both your poems, which are really packed. They're beautiful to listen to. The musicality, the rhythm, the energy, yet also the text. So I encourage everyone to go to the text for sure, but it is such a privilege to hear both of you read your poems. I'm going to kind of riff off something that you articulated, John, before you read your last poem, which is one I just love so much. It's that distinction between optimism and hope, because I do think hope is such a multidimensional, complex thing. Denise, at the beginning of our conversation, you talked about how important it is to make meaning, and that we make meaning through engagement and struggle. So your poems, both of your poems, give me hope because they do confront. And at the same time, I feel they touch on beauty. They never forget what is so precious and beautiful and transient, and the importance of that. So you manage to kind of bring in that whole dialectic, I think, in such a nuanced and really complicated, complex way that that's the reason for writing, right? I mean, to make those kinds of communications, and that's why we're so grateful that there are poets like you out there doing the work. So thank you. I guess that wasn't a
Thanks, Allie.
question. That was just an appreciation. One of the things that I suspect probably enriched your own situating yourselves as engaged poets was some of the travel that you did outside of the country and interacting with other, activists, writers in different places. And I'm wondering if both of you, I'd love to hear from both of you comment on what those journeys to Europe meant to you. Is poetry embraced more as a popular culture, a popular art form? And what did you learn about what it means to be an American poet and what your goals might be as American poets?
Let's see. Well, the first time that I left the country, actually, I was with Denise. Dee, I won't steal you. You can talk about this if you want. When she was younger, she spent a year in France as a college student. I hadn't been out of the country until we were together, Dee. I think it was in 2001 or 2002, and we were camping in our favorite spot in northern Vermont. We decided to go and cross the Canadian border. So that was my first international travel. In 2008, I had put together an anthology of U.S. poets who were engaged socially or politically in some way for a British publisher. Andy Croft runs Smokestack Books, which is an amazing press out of Middlesbrough, an old working class town in northern England. And so he brought us over and we did a tour. And that was my second time out of the country, which, it was the United Kingdom. But even going to the United Kingdom, I appreciated an international perspective, how important it is to get out of, kind of the provincial place. Again, like we want to pay attention to where you are, but you also have to go wider than that, right? I mean, if I look out my window right now, I see a white picket fence and I can conclude that the world is just perfect. And it's not true. And even a place like England, which is sort of a parallel universe, it starts to give you a sense of how big the world is. In 2012, we went to Serbia and read at the 49th International Festival of Literature in Belgrade. And then in 2014, we returned to Serbia and went to Smederevo's 45th Poetry Autumn. And, there's a lot to say about Serbia and more than I can say here, certainly that went beyond maybe some of the impressions that we got in the news. But Serbia was a lesson in resilience and beauty. They were economically struggling place. You can still see evidence of NATO bombings, along the river and in the city, in the middle of the city. But even in a place like Serbia, they were holding their 49th and 45th poetry festivals that were international, and it made me think about, I think some of the, in the United States, we like to hear other U.S. poets and, when we get outside ourselves a little bit, but there's a lot of echo chamber in U.S. poetry. I mean, even putting aside politics or subject position, U.S. poets hear other U.S. poets and we reference other U.S. poets. These places with no money, with, buckets out to catch the water dripping through the ceilings, putting every last resource they had into bringing poets from around the world, and really from around the world, not just from Europe, China, I mean, just global experiences in these places and honoring it and celebrating each other. And that was very inspiring to me.
It was also very moving to take in poetry in languages that you didn't understand and to see how when people conduct a reading, how their body language and how poetry translates, even though you don't know the language, you could feel what the people were saying. And it really brought us together. I've never experienced such a global connectedness as when we were in Serbia for the international festivals. And it was just wonderful. And we still have lifelong friends from those days. And these festivals were maybe 5 days, but we were together and lived and ate and drank and shared poetry intensively for that period. And it really gives you a global perspective that is so important, and to not really get caught up into any kind of poetry business, but to really think about what is the purpose of poetry? How does it make us more fully human across the world? And it would be very exciting, I think, at some point, if our country were to host an international poetry festival. I think it would be very exciting. I still think it could happen right here in Storrs. I'm optimistic. Yeah. I'm hopeful.
One great moment that happened that illustrates that, we're leaving Belgrade. Part of the festival was the small groups of poets broke out and went out to the countryside, to small villages. And we were with a small group led by Bratislav Milanovic. And, there was a total language barrier there, except that Bratislav spoke French and Denise speaks French. And so, I would ask a question and Denise would translate it from English to French, and Bratislav would talk about it maybe with his friends in Serbian and then translate it back. Sometimes Denise would turn to me and start speaking French, and I'm like, I could get just a little bit of that. And so she was working pretty hard.
Who knew my French would pay off?
Yeah.
There. But it's really, it is important. I mean, I think we've learned through Curbstone Press. We're on the Curbstone Foundation and we run a poetry series. What we've learned, I think, in working closely with Curbstone over the years is the power of translation. And we've known some amazing translators, Richard Schaff, many others, Maria Proser, James Scully, others who've taken the poetry of others and brought it to us in the States. So really locally, we have Curbstone Press to thank. And that's been something that's really opened us up. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned translation, because I think still in the United States, poetry and other literary works in translation is still somewhat marginalized, as opposed to there's more American poetry, American literature read in India and Great Britain and, name the country. So we have that, a specific kind of American exceptionalism about our, our sort of adolescent view of what our literary canon should be. So I know there are a lot of small presses working very hard at that, including one that's Rochester-based, Open Letter. And that was one of my questions: how important is it for us to be reading works in translation? And you answered it. Mm. And we also have a question from one of our guests, which is one of my questions: which poets do you turn to for sustenance?
Good question. The answer to that question, I think, changes, but there are poets I come back to a lot. Certainly William Blake, who, his auguries of innocence were kind of maybe a seed to some of what I was trying to do. It's amazing, some of the 18th century William Blake poetry, how much energy it still has today. Langston Hughes is someone I return to time and time again. Tadeusz Rusewicz, who is a Polish poet, his book The Survivor and Other Poems, I would highly recommend. I admire poets who are very ambitious, not in a careerist sense, but who are really trying to do something to get at what it means to be human, even when they're writing just closely observed poems. They're swinging for the fences. They're trying to do something big. So those are the poets I come back to again and again. Adrienne Rich, June Jordan, just to name a few.
And I too am an omnivore. We share a lot of poets that we love. I really love a lot of local poets. My first poetry readings were actually Marilyn Nelson at the University of Connecticut and Joan Joffe Hall had a reading together, and I still read their poems and enjoy those because they were two women who inspired me. They were role models for me. And then of course, many others locally, Kate Rushin, so many Connecticut poets. I don't, need to just say global poets, but I often like to look at people who I know who are writers, people in our writers groups, because their poetry and prose inspire me. Because I see people, we're sitting across the room and they're writers, they're not these people in an anthology. They are in an anthology, but they're people who are just living their regular lives, going shopping, talking about everything. So I love Elizabeth Bishop, but I also love Bessie Rayna, and I love all of these. They all mix together wonderfully, so a lot of voices makes a wonderful tapestry. And John and I are always handing off different poets to each other and sharing. So it's rich.
Well, we'll definitely have to invite you back because there's so much to learn from you both, to be enriched by, to hear you read more poems. It's 8 o'clock, but I just wanted to see, a couple more. I got to go into the Q&A because no, we're good. Lots of nice comments from folks, but please do say you'll come back, and perhaps in the after, you'll even visit us way up here in Rochester. We promise not to bring you up in the wintertime, but I miss you both very much. So this has been so lovely for me, and thank you so much for sharing your absolutely gorgeous work with all of us at Writers and Books.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Allison. Thank you, Dan.
And everybody who's out there, we can't see you, but thank you for being here. I hope my mom's out there.
I think my mom might be.
Good night to all the moms. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Allison.
Love you both.
Good night, all.
Take care.
Bye.
Love you guys. Bye.